So I'm going to mention our two guys and introduce who needs no introduction. The first one, but we have with us tonight Rabbi Knight and Rabbi Nichols, who are going to help guide us through wherever we are to wherever we're going to be. And with that, I'll turn it over to Rabbi Knight.
Hi, thank you, thank you, everyone. So, what great faces to see tonight, and to be able to see so many different faces that I just so desperately wish we were seeing each other in 3D and not 2D, and that the faces that are just making me smile, and I'm so appreciative of your participation and presence here this evening. So thank you, from all of the faces that I'm looking at, and just everyone. It just warms my heart. Um, so, as you might imagine, in rabbinical school, they did not teach how to deal with a pandemic. For all of the history of the Jewish people, and frankly, through many pandemics before, right? Where there's lots of lessons in that, as Kent was saying, that we can pull from and draw upon to help us imagine, to help us to actually live with values and virtues and with intentionality in the present. But it's not like this was a course and how exactly to go about doing this in 2020 and into 2021. And in addition to that, of course, the challenges and the dynamics of the pandemic is that it's forcing us to really think not only about who we are and how we gather, but also how we're going to gather in the near future and in the long future. And sometimes, like a pointillist painting, the closer you get, the less clear it is, but the further back you are, the more of the picture that you can see. And in some regards, we're in sort of the pointillist painting of the pandemic. That the closer we are, it is sort of a little more difficult to understand, a little more difficult to discern. The further out we start to look, we're able to see some pictures of how we can sort of reemerge. And so, with that sort of idea, what we wanted to share tonight was sort of the an opportunity for you to ask lots of questions. Any question about synagogue operations or how the Jewish community is handling this, by all means, we are totally open to any questions. But beyond the questions, we want to also explore the Jewish values, the way that we have chosen as a congregation and as a community to center our thinking around this, and around how we make decisions in partnership with one another and in partnership with Shalom Park. We want to share our observations around what's been happening into our community and the dynamics through the pandemic, and give you maybe an update about like how we're handling life cycles and the pastoral challenges that are existent, and the creativity with which we have really come to really approach this moment with. We want to give you perhaps a taste and conversation about that future, about that sort of pointillism picture that hopefully is a little more clear further on, and then also leave it open for some questions and answers. But most importantly, this was also an opportunity to continually reintroduce Rabbi Beth Nichols. Rabbi Nichols joined us this summer as our director of lifelong Jewish learning. And to say it is one thing to like join a synagogue and have to create a whole new, in a new position in a new city. That's like hard enough. It is hard enough to make that move from New York to here. It is doubly hard to do so in a pandemic where actually Rabbi Nichols has actually it was a while before she actually even like physically met many of our staff members, let alone any of our congregants. And so, with incredible respect for the vision that she has, the way that she has gone about this, frankly the planning that she's done with the religious school, and figuring out new models like on day one. I couldn't be happier that we have Rabbi Nichols as part of our community. And so Rabbi Nichols is going to share sort of the framework, the Jewish framework for how we've been approaching the pandemic and some of the ideas and thought processes that we have. So Rabbi Nichols, do you want to start us off to give the Jewish framework?
Thank you. And I just want to thank everyone for having me this evening. I was saying to someone today, I feel like next year gets to be the do-over year when I learn all the things I was supposed to learn in my first year, but didn't learn because this year is different than any other year. But I look forward to meeting you all in person soon. Rabbi Knight and I were in the same class in our year in Israel. And Rabbi Knight, you just must have missed the Wednesday seminar on pandemics.
On pandemics, I did. Sorry, yeah, I really, I was skipping it, frankly.
So I'm going to share my screen because I want to start us off with the question of, David, I cannot answer how the American Jewish community responded to the pandemic of 1918, but I have a couple of other pandemics to share with you. So this first text that you see here is from the Babylonian Talmud, and is telling people what they should do if you are in the middle of a plague. Oh, hold on one second. There we go. So it says, the sages taught, if there is a plague in the city, gather your feet, i.e. limit the time you spend out of the house. As it is stated in the verse, and none of you shall go out of the opening of his house until the morning. And it says in another verse, come, my people, enter into your chambers and shut your doors behind you. Hide yourself for a little moment until the anger has passed by. And it says, outside the sword will bereave, and in the chambers, terror. Now, the reason I liked this text in reference to a plague or a pandemic was that I think it recognizes the fear that is there, that we are both, it says the sword will bereave outside, but in the chambers there's terror. That inside we still might be scared, that there's fears that go along with all of this, but that but outside it is worse. So it is worth it to kind of to remain inside. Now, your screen did not change, did it? There we go. The second piece I have here is from a pandemic from the 19th century. And it is going to sound familiar, a lot of their suggestions. This is a letter from one rabbi to another rabbi of what they recommend. We provide the following guidelines given the recommendation of the physicians that gathering of large crowds for prolonged periods of time, leaving early on an empty stomach, and breathing the sharp toxic morning air is likely to cause cholera. Furthermore, the fumes of oil lamps in the synagogues are harmful to one's health. All synagogues, including both the men's and women's section, should fill to only half of their seating capacity, such that every other seat is empty. To allow for equal access during the high holidays, half the congregants will attend for the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, while the other half will attend for Yom Kippur, with the specific holiday being determined by lottery. A military guard should be posted at the synagogue entrance to maintain orderly seating. The length of the service for Rosh Hashanah should not exceed 5 hours. Each oleh to the Torah, so each person receiving honor to the Torah, will be limited to one mishaberach. Piyutim, which are liturgical poems, should be omitted, and the cantor should not prolong the prayers with melodies or musical flourishes. So what's interesting to me is that they're using some medical knowledge, right? It seems like they're starting to understand how disease works, although not cholera, because cholera is spread through contaminated water. So many of these steps would have done nothing for them. However, they're starting to understand how disease is transmitted and starting to really see that as a responsibility of the religious community to recommend to their people. So we see these earlier pandemics and then thinking, how do we respond? So when we put together documents as Temple Bethel about the pandemic, we always preface them with Jewish values, thinking what are the Jewish values that we want to operate on as we think about all of the different options that we have for this in this pandemic. And the first one is pikuach nefesh, saving a life. We find this value from Mishnah Sanhedrin, chapter 4, verse 5. Therefore, but a single person was created in the world to teach that if any man has caused a single life to perish from Israel, he is deemed by Scripture as if he had caused a whole world to perish. And anyone who saves a single soul from Israel, he is deemed by Scripture as if he had saved a whole world. So that text is where we derive this notion of pikuach nefesh, of saving a life, that is the kind of ultimate Jewish value. And from the Talmud, we see that it says there is no halacha, no law that stands in the way of saving a life, except for the prohibitions against idol worship and forbidden sexual relationships and bloodshed. So basically, except for these three things, you can break any other laws for the sake of saving a human life. And that is really the ultimate thing that should be at the top of all the decisions that are being made. The other values that we listed on our Hashkivenu document, our returning to the building document, are these three. Dina de Malchuta Dina literally means the law of the land is the law. And it's an idea that came from rabbinic times that whatever community Jews are living in, they need to follow the laws of the state. This was very important early on and continued to be important for not seeing the Jews as a threat and as a separate community, but seeing ourselves as part of wherever we were living, and a kind of assurance that we were going to and should be following the laws set by the state. I think what's interesting for us here is that when we set out that this was one of the values we wanted to make sure we were stating in how we responded to the pandemic, we said that we would follow all the laws of the land, meaning the government mandates, but that we could also go farther. And we have done that. By law, religious institutions have been exempt from many of the limits on gathering. And we have said all along, we're not going to kind of take that religious exemption because we see other values that are holding higher. So not that we are not following the law, but we're following it and then going past what it is. Kol Yisrael Aravim Ze Bazeh really is the value of communal responsibility. And in the Talmud, it tells us, for all transgressions of the Torah is not the whole world punished. Lo, it is written, and they shall stumble one upon another, one because of the iniquity of the other. This teaches us that all Israel are responsible for one another. So they're really telling us that we're responsible for one another because the sin of one person can kind of cause the other to stumble and trip. And I think this is really something that we've seen in this pandemic, of recognizing that we're responsible for one another because the choices that we make affect the health and safety of the people around us. A fourth value that we said we wanted to make sure was in all of our decisions is lo ta'ashok sachir, to treat workers fairly. And remembering that it is not just about people gathering for Jewish community, but all of those of us who work in the synagogue, and making sure that we were respectful of the health and safety of all of the people that work for us, and making sure that that was a consideration of how we went about this. I want to add two more. The first is al tifrosh min hatzibor, do not separate yourself from the community. I think that the challenge with values in all parts of our life is finding the right balance, that values will conflict with one another, and you have to figure out how do I make a decision that's going to have the most values applied. And this idea from the Mishnah of not separating ourselves from the community seems to go against the idea of going inside of our houses, right? And pulling our feet up from that first text. And so a lot of the decisions that we've made, and we have to make as individuals as well, is finding that balance of wanting to still be part of the community, but also wanting to protect ourselves. And so that has meant thinking about creative ways to have community, like gathering on Zoom, but also recognizing that we're making different decisions about level of risk that we're each comfortable with, based on what our needs are. I think the idea of do not separate yourself from the community also now resonates with me about mental health. That thinking, while physical health might mean one thing in response to the pandemic, that we've also learned that we have to think of what are the mental health needs of being in contact and around other people. That question of risk is the last piece I want to share before we move back to the present. There's a notion in Jewish law of safek sakana, of potential danger. And the texts go through long exercises of how do you determine whether you should do something? Because on the one hand, you should protect yourself from any danger. But if you protect yourself from any danger, you don't really live, because you should, stay in the house and never go anywhere. Wrap yourself in bubble wrap and not do anything. So you have to decide what level of risk are you willing to take. And for Jewish law, it becomes a question of potential danger and definite danger. So in this first text we have from the Shulchan Aruch, a medieval law text. One must refrain from putting coins in one's mouth, lest it is covered with dried saliva of those afflicted with boils. I would suggest not putting coins in your mouth, period. Similarly, should be careful of all things that cause danger. They also prohibited to go in a dangerous place, such as under a leaning wall or alone at night. They also prohibited to drink water from rivers at night, or to put one's mouth on a stream of water and drink, because these matters have a concern of danger. And all these things are because of the danger, and a person who guards his soul will distance himself from them, and it is prohibited to rely on a miracle in all of these matters. So there's a few pieces that I think are important to us here. One, we have to decide our own dangers, because, for example, not drinking water from rivers at night was to avoid drinking leeches by mistake, because you couldn't see them in the dark. We have our own dangers and our understanding of what they are, and we should guard our souls from them, right? We should distance ourselves from danger. But how much danger can we really distance ourselves from? And this last piece, it's prohibited to rely on a miracle. We can't say, and I think this is really important, we can't say, like, God is going to protect us. It's okay. I'm going to just, I'll endanger myself. We have to take our own responsibilities and try to stay away from danger. But what level of danger is allowed? So this next text is talking about if putting yourself in danger for another person. If the potential danger leans towards certainty, he is not obligated to put himself in such a position for another's benefit. And even if the potential is 50-50, he is not obligated. For why would it be certain that your blood is redder? Perhaps his blood is redder. But if the danger is not even 50-50, but leans towards saving another without his being endangered, one violates, do not stand idly by the blood of your fellow, if one does not save him. So it becomes this real balance of asking ourselves, what risk is there? What is a certain risk? What is a potential risk? And what are the benefits of doing something? So I think the challenge of this pandemic that I've witnessed with so many people is having those questions of what is the balance that I'm comfortable with, and potentially that balance being a different balance than other people might choose. And figuring out how do we live in a community and stay connected to the community when people are each addressing those risks at a different place. So that gets us kind of into some of the background of how we shaped our decisions and the values that we're trying to kind of find a balance with as we move towards what can our community do. Rabbi Knight.
Thank you. I'm going to stop right there to see if there's any questions that emerge just there. And if there's any questions, by all means, either raise your hand, or you can of course type them into the chat box, just to make sure that we have an opportunity to take any questions at the moment. But definitely not all at once.
All right, I'll start.
Okay.
So when we were all little, we learned about plagues for the first time sitting at a Seder desk. Sitting at Seder, we said, if things are bad, you can call on God and he will rescue the Jewish people and give plagues. Now, isn't there some liturgy that says when you see plagues, there's some kind of divine guidance being wrought on earth?
So I'm so glad that Rabbi Nichols is going to answer that question.
All right.
And I thought, you guys would want a softball.
And then that's okay.
Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate the softball questions. I really appreciate that, Matt. Rabbi Nichols, and then I'll respond.
So I think that there are certainly, of the different pandemic texts that I read and picked from, there are certainly many that reference whatever plague or pandemic was happening as some kind of evil that God was bringing on the people. So we can certainly find that in our text. I think, though, that we have to ask ourselves what our own personal theologies are, and I think we've moved away in many ways from the kind of biblical notion of reward and punishment, and not seeing kind of all of the things that happen as reward and punishment, but asking ourselves kind of how can Judaism help us address and choose to act in these situations versus how do we understand the causes of them?
So, I mean, thanks. I think that's a great answer, Rabbi Nichols. So yes, there's the plague from Egypt, but the plague from Egypt is supposed to be a direct response and result to the redemption of our people from slavery and servitude. So it's sort of a hard one that's potentially a hard one to sort of connect with. I think actually the clearer one is the plague, or the potential plague of Tzara'at, which is found in the book of Leviticus. And the plagues of Tzara'at are sort of defined sort of in two ways. One is of course, the scaly affliction. Some would say leprosy, although that's a bad translation. It's just Tzara'at, the scaly affliction of the body, but also potentially of our homes and whatnot. And so what Rabbi Nichols also, what she said was, I think is actually particularly poignant, is that the biblical theology is that there must be some reason, something that you have done in order to sort of cause this to happen, right? And that is a theology that does not sit well with the majority of Jews. Now, some Jews, by the way, still have that theology, right? There are many sects of Judaism that have that particular theology, but for most of us, and particularly post-Holocaust, right, that is not a theology, a system of belief of God that actually we are comfortable with. That said, and nor do we particularly like the blame the victim analysis, right? That is particularly troubling. That said, what is true coming out of those pandemics is that there is in Jewish tradition an understanding that we are responsible and we have a role to play in how we respond to the pandemics and or the plagues. And there's a lot there in Jewish tradition about making sure that you are helping the poor and the needy, and like what are the systemic issues that the plagues make worse, right, during that time, if that makes sense. And there's a lot that Jewish tradition says about what our specific rules are around how we support members of our community, how we respond, how we create healthy environments, and the responsibilities that we have to actually manage and support and deal with the result of a plague. But it's a hard one, because I maybe it's just me, but I personally don't believe that the pandemic is because of is a divine punishment. That said, I do believe that the way that the pandemic has run its course is because of human also because of human responsibility, right? And so we have to be able to take ownership over that and recognize our own role and the role of government and whatnot and how we have responded. So that is an important component. Any other questions before we sort of move on?
Yes, can I ask a question on a quick, Bob Larrick?
Yep.
I just, in agreement with what you said, we're talking about, and I just got off another foreign affairs group, which brings it up too. The politics and challenges of our time. Could it be a way of God challenging us to look at ourselves, our society, our American exceptionalism, our globalism and capitalism? Has it really lifted all ships and engaged sense of empathy when we talk about empathy? Has it engaged more rural communities and white as well as black? And has and the book I was sort of quoting is the Fascism This Time and the Global Future of Democracy by Theo Horst, H-O-R-E-S-H, which touches upon these things.
Yeah,
but the issue of Jesse Helm's
thanks.
sense of capitalism, war on government,
sure,
and that type of mentality of distrust of government, who seem to be part of the politics of the Bush era that continues on, and Newt Gingrich.
Sure. Well, we're not going to, I don't want to get into partisan politics, but I think we can definitely touch on that here. I mean,
some of the values of our times.
Sure. I mean, I think that one of the things that has made it frankly more difficult is the lack of organized response to all of this. And where we're getting our information from. I think that one dynamic that has made it exceedingly difficult is the inability to sort of trust fact, like what are facts and what is truth. I think that it has made it more difficult to manage when there are not clear lines of communication about what is actually factually going on, and the ways that this is. I mean, the ways that this has been partisan and politicized has been exceedingly unhelpful. And I can tell you that I would just add that we it is there are times where it feels like we're playing like amateur epidemiologists. That thank God we have medical advisors and support, which we'll talk about in a moment, but the lack of coordinated response has definitely been a problem, both on a national level and a worldwide level. And that I can definitely agree with. Rabbi Nichols, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I think, Bob, some of the other issues that you brought up, that one of the effects of the pandemic, I think, has been to highlight some of the other inequalities in our country that already existed, but that the pandemic has affected different communities, in different ways, and the way that then the response follows, I think has highlighted it for us and perhaps attuned us to different things that we need to think about moving as we move forward and out of the pandemic, that many of the things that we've seen will not have gone away. And so that kind of adds to the complexity of the experience of the pandemic.
Yep. Any other questions?
Yeah, I do have one actually, and it's not a philosophical one. It's not a big picture one. It's focused on the Charlotte Jewish community and how Temple Beth has been able to help. Obviously, us not being there and seeing things. You could share a little bit to let us know what has been happening behind the scenes to help our community.
Yeah, I mean, a great deal has been happening behind the scenes. So, at the outset of this, so I'll sort of get into sort of behind the scenes at Temple, and then I'll get into the behind the scenes at community wide. So, really last my colleagues will make fun of me, and definitely Natalie and others who are on here will say that, like, I have a tendency to sort of, I'm a futurist, and so I have a tendency to sort of like take a look at something and sort of expand out to sort of what could be the impact of this. And starting somewhere around late January and February, I started to articulate to my colleagues at Temple that we were leading towards, I think, a potential pandemic in the United States and worldwide. And so we started to prepare. And actually really started to look at what was actually happening. And by late February, we had, or by mid-February, we had developed a pandemic plan about what to do if there was an emergent pandemic, and how we would actually move. What are the stages of things that we would move through in order to make decisions about, like what we were seeing, and how we had to make decisions as a from a governance perspective, but also as from a staff perspective, and how we move things towards online services and whatnot. And we had developed an entire pandemic plan. And then and that plan got presented to the board and to members of the lay leadership by late February, early March. And less than a week and a half later, we moved from stage 1 in that plan to stage 5 in that plan in a matter of 24 hours. And so we had, we really saw this coming, and our staff can absolutely attest that we had started developing systems to put into place to be able to operate the synagogue virtually or online, and recognizing that this was going to be a reality, and that included transitioning all sorts of systems in place to being online, and making sure that there was flattening of information and a space with which we could actually do project management and all sorts of things to really make sure our systems were in place. And so by the time that we actually at Temple Bethel started to make the decision, we were sort of actually early in the decision-making process for Shalom Park. And people may or may not remember this, but we actually had communicated to our Shalom Park partners about 2 or 3 days before any of the other institutions started to really recognize that this was really even coming. And then what ended up happening was that the other institutions, I think, really heard what we were saying, and really, I think, appreciated Temple Bethel's leadership on that. And then what ended up happening is that, thank goodness and thank God for Sue Worrell and the Federation. The Federation started to gather and connect the leadership, and they do this always. We're always open lines of communication on Shalom Park and the Jewish agencies in the Charlotte region. And the Federation did an incredible job of helping to gather and connect and to help support the agencies and the agency heads during this time. And really, this is one of those reasons why I also continue to support the Federation, and above and beyond all the things that the Federation does. But the Federation recognized immediately that this was going to have massive financial impact on the broader Jewish community. They immediately went out and raised $500,000 to help support organizations, and and created multiple rounds of funding to help support organizations in specific costs related to unforeseen, unbudgeted costs that dealt with the transitions that needed to take place. And those executive directors, the executive directors of the agencies, both in Charlotte and also specifically in Shalom Park, are meeting regularly, literally. We're meeting once every 2 weeks for Shalom Park executive directors. The park partners are meeting also in alternating weeks, once every 2 weeks, and then the Charlotte broader Jewish community is meeting, I think, once every 2 weeks as well. And that is an expenditure of time. I mean, it's a time and energy, but it has been all around sharing resources, creating plans, being able to be very clear about the decisions that are happening, and how it's impacting one another, troubleshooting, asking questions, and being a support system to one another. And so, I really have to give my partners across the Shalom Park and across the Charlotte Jewish community an incredible amount of respect for being the kind of partners that have been, everyone has been in it together. That is absolutely a fact. everyone has been in it together, and recognizing that we're all in this together and supportive of one another. And it has meant sometimes, calling up and asking questions and getting support, and or giving support to people who are confronting certain things. So that's sort of been the culture of what's actually happening. And we're somewhat all in the same place right now. We have I would say that the synagogues. We can sort of talk through some of that, about sort of like where we are, and where we're sort of needing to be. So sort of going to that, I'm going to put into the uh, into the recognition, actually into the chat box. Rabbi, could you put in the chat box the dashboard? Is that possible?
Mhm.
And we'll talk about that in a second. So effectively, in terms of the decision-making process for Temple Bethel, we have a dynamic decision-making process. Our staff leadership team, which is sort of the senior people at Temple Bethel, the senior staff members at Temple Bethel, we are meeting on a weekly basis, but about every 2 to 3 weeks, we are delving into the COVID numbers and what's actually happening, and sort of making decisions. We determined that we needed to be as flexible as possible, and so in that flexibility, we've recognized that we stopped calendaring for an entire year in advance, and we started calendaring 2 to 3 months in advance. We started to recognize that that in that flexibility, that there was also, as we created sort of different risk profiles, we recognized that there were certain things that we needed to elevate above, some above the other, right? So for example, in-person worship is really, really important. We recognize that we want to have in-person worship as being really important, but but we're having success with it on Zoom. And if we're going to put our energy and efforts places, we've determined, for example, to elevate having our religious school be in person, right? And making sure that we are able to operate that in as a safe environment as possible. And so you'll see in sort of matrix as you look at the decision-making process, and I can share my screen and sort of show what that also looks like for us. You can see that what we did is we took the values of how we want to operate, which are sort of the key principles, and then we started to articulate for ourselves what we saw was sort of the risk indicators, right? The lowest risk, the moderate risk, and the high risk. And in those risk indicators, we started to take a look at a decision-making dashboard that helped us to consider how we make decisions about opening, and about what sort of happens in person versus online, and sort of how that works. And we are looking on a, again, every 2 to 3 weeks basis, looking at the public health criteria, and the which includes, by the way, the case rates per 100,000, the test positivity percentages, the ability of local hospitals to accommodate. We're very aware of that, of what the hospitals can accommodate. We're looking at, of course, the federal and state mandates, the religious school positivity rates when we're in session and in person, gatherings and travel, for example. So we were very conscientious of the impact of what various different gathering and travel, seasonal travel opportunities around holidays was going to have towards the numbers, and how we did that. Building readiness, we have completely retrofitted the building to be able to be as safe as possible, and sort of any sort of Shalom Park transmission, and sort of what we're seeing in partnership there. And we've really we've been really utilizing that COVID decision matrix, which has been public for a long time. We wanted to be as transparent with the synagogue and the community as possible to help us make decisions. On top of that, we also had a return process that showed sort of like if we were in red, or if we're in yellow or green, what kind of things we are going to be returning towards. And that's the sort of what we've called the Hashivenu document. And actually, I know it's on our website, but I don't actually have it in front of me. I'm sorry. But you can also all read that, and sort of take a look at how we've done that. The truth of the matter is that there's been really no single appropriate response to all of this. The situation and the knowledge has just changed over time. And so our sense is that we have to be absolutely as flexible as possible. With regards to the community, the same is really true. We have recognized that the park and the partners that we have are all going through all of this on themselves, and the work that we do, we have shared openly with others. The work that others have done, they've shared openly with us, and they're really, I couldn't be prouder of our community in creating a safe space with which to discuss the challenges, the sort of collegiality and support. In terms of pastoral decisions, and I'll sort of jump to that. This has had an incredible effect. And let me just say something about that, about this as a moment. There have been a lot of people that this has affected. It has affected people financially in huge ways. It has absolutely affected people who are, it's affected everyone. Even people who are, it's sort of like, the Jewish, like, I've got nothing to complain about, but I'm going to find the thing that I complain about. But the truth of the matter is that, even people who, like for my, I'll just say to myself, like, my wife and I both have jobs. Our kids are safe and healthy, thank God, and we're at home all the time. We, our kids are not doing the activities that they once were doing. They're, it's exhausting parenting and teaching and all these different things. And at the end of the day, like, a lot of people are really exhausted. And there's a real sense of sometimes shame for people who feel like they are, is doing as well as possible, but also as exhausted as they are. There are people who have felt incredibly isolated during this time. There's a lot of fatigue and pandemic fatigue that we're just hearing over and over again. And it's not, like a battery that's run out. This is about sort of the bank account that of energy that we have, and sort of what does it mean to sort of dip into our emotional reserves and overdraw from the emotional reserves that we have, partially because day-to-day decisions that would have been normal sometimes feel like life and death choices, like, and a lot of people are just exhausted of making those choices. So we have a lot of that. We also have a recognition that that this has really affected many different people and really different, we're all experiencing the same storm, but it's we're in a lot of different boats. So parents with young children are in a really, really different boat than the isolation that a lot of that single individuals or the elderly are really feeling right now. And so the specific needs, the pastoral needs that people have, are really, really different. And that has definitely, the congregation has made many rounds of phone calls. We actually need volunteers to make more rounds of phone calls, because we know it's time to make more phone calls. We've made 4 or 5 rounds of phone calls already to our members. And we're hearing stories of just the sort of the ways in which this has impacted people in different ways. From a pastoral perspective, and sort of the life cycles and what people are, what we're doing. And the question that Matt Sininsky asked in the chat box, it really depends. B'nai Mitzvah and that has, we had opened up in November to having in-person B'nai Mitzvah, and then we had to close back down because the numbers sort of, as we all know, sort of got out of control. And we're ready to open back up when the timing is right and the numbers look good enough for us to do that. But right now, B'nai Mitzvah are all happening in people's homes. We are delivering Torah scrolls every week to people's homes, right?
And Rabbi Knight, as of this past week, as you know, we now have a bar mitzvah student who built a portable ark so that he used it for his bar mitzvah, and so that other people in their homes can have a portable ark for the Torah for Zoom B'nai Mitzvah.
Alan is. I can't see if Alan's still on this, but Alan, there you are. Alan, you should see this. It is absolutely absolutely an incredible piece of woodworking. I think you would of all the people on the Brotherhood would really, really appreciate what this young man has done. So that is true. We have for funerals. There's a specific question that was asked. We went through a whole process with the Hebrew Cemetery and Temple Israel, and also with Chabad, to come up with procedures about how we would do funerals in this time. And it has to do with, again, the thresholds of numbers. And we're looking at, we went from, 10 people or less to 25 people or less to 50 people or less, and then back down. And it really depends. All the funerals that we were doing have really changed, in which the people are being buried before the actual funeral service now, so that we are not actually spending, gathering for minimize the amount of time that we're gathering outdoors, socially distanced. And it is really difficult. I'm a hugger, and there's just really, it is exceedingly painful to officiate funerals and not be able to be to see families be physically present with each other because they're in different bubbles, or to even be, physically connected to the people who are mourners. And I will say this for myself, that, I've lost 3 family members in the last 10 months. And I have not been at my own family members' funerals. And to be able to, so just personally, like, I really identify with the experience of mourners in this moment, because it is really an awful experience to not be able to be at the funerals and with your loved ones, and for the Jewish, aspects of mourning.
I will say, Rabbi Knight, I want to add to that. The other thing, though, that the pandemic has offered us in those respects is the ability for people to gather from all over
Correct.
Zoom. That on the one hand, people who may have flown in can't be there together. On the other hand, many people who wouldn't have been able to fly in or be a part of anything are now able to be present at a funeral or during a Shiva minyan. And I think those are some of the lessons that we will keep after this, is how do we continue to expand the ability of people from all over to be part of something that they wouldn't be able to go to.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think that one of the conversations that we're actually having at Temple, as we sort of look out to the future and look at hybrid models, is recognizing that there's a lot of people, so as an example, when we had the B'nai Mitzvah in the building, we set it up so that we had, the sanctuary looks really different right now with this setup, but we had huge TV screens, multiple computers inside the sanctuary, and we had people from California who were zooming in to do the aliyah while we were in our sanctuary. That is really different than people having an aliyah to the Torah from, inside of our sanctuary, and only the people who are present, being able to participate. And so one of the things that we're really thinking through right now, and it's why we had actually started a technology fund, and is to recognize that the technology that we now need to purchase and that we now need to invest in needs to allow us to not just be able to have in-person events, but actually hybrid experiences where those who are present because they can, and those who are physically present, present but not physically present because they can't for any number of reasons, can still experience the what we're accomplishing, and the Jewish experience that we're creating. And so we're really looking at all of that, and to make sure that there's those who can't physically be present can still be present and still participate really fully. Do you want to talk about our kids and teens, Rabbi Nichols? I mean, that's also a big piece of this, is the effect that this has had on kids and teens.
Yeah, I think for all of us are feeling, socially disconnected from people, but we've really seen that has a dramatic impact on kids. And one of the differences for me from moving from suburban New York to here is the disconnect from the Jewish community that is felt by many, because often people aren't seeing other Jewish kids except when they come to religious school. So really, for me, recognizing the significance of being able to come together and connect just socially and emotionally with the other Jewish kids, and seeing that as a priority. So for me as the educator, really helping our faculty understand that we're gonna lower the pressure on the content and how much content we're covering, because really for us, if one of our goals is for kids to feel connected and excited about being Jewish, we need to focus on making those connections and less on how much material we've covered. And I think that will continue, because especially for teens as well, the pressure to keep learning all day in school, over video, means that by the time they get to us, it's hard to get anything else in. And providing them with opportunities to talk about how they're feeling, to just kind of socialize with each other, has been a priority for us. It's hard when we can't have them be together, but trying to be creative about how can we do things that are in person or socially distanced, or where you drive through the parking lot and pick something up, so that at least there's a feeling of having glimpsed each other's 3D faces. So I think that will continue to be something that we kind of focus on, about maintaining those relationships, because for kids, that's just been such a hard feeling to not have been able to kind of play with other kids, and be physically around them. I just wanted to add too, Rabbi, that you were talking about the kind of pieces that we can keep, and thinking through, and I saw somebody had asked the question about how can we help. I think one of the questions that we're going to continue to be wrestling with, and we'll need to solicit feedback from all of you and the whole congregation, is a question of what are things that are important to make sure that we keep it when we can be in person again, that we keep in person, and what are things that you might want to continue seeing available online. Because for some things, we've gotten more people attending online than we ever would have gotten in person. So there is that convenience factor. So what are the kinds of things that we might continue to offer online because of the number of people that can be reached? And what are the things that we want to make sure we do in person? And I think for me, for education, we've already started to see, we've been doing Hebrew in small groups online. And that's something that I think we will continue for most kids, because the ability for a child to get on and have a small group Hebrew study for an hour without having to leave their home is really a convenience for someone who might normally have to drive their kid 45 minutes on a Wednesday afternoon to get to religious school. However, as soon as we can be back in person, I would want to be able to offer things in person, because of the social aspect, and that one of our highest values is to have kids feel connected to the community. And we can't do that solely by being online. So kind of finding that balance, I think, is going to be one of our most difficult, I don't know if difficult's the right word. One of the things I think we'll be experimenting with for a while is finding that balance.
Philip's question was, what is the best case for integrating all learning from 12 months of pandemic into the new normal with in-person programs and events? Can you describe the future state you expect for TBE? Philip, thank you for that question. I think that we're going to be, so a couple of things. The first thing I think is really important. We as a congregation and as a community are going to need to reweave the social fabric of the community. That for many, the social fabric of the community has actually frayed, and it's not out of it's not out of animosity or necessarily negative things, but there's a huge impact to people. We noticed that when people came into the synagogue for the high holidays, at the time of the high holidays, we had an open opportunity for people to stand in front of the ark, masked and separated, and just to stand in front of the open ark and have a moment of prayer. It really profoundly affected people. And we're going to have people who've come into the building for the first time in a year and see sort of the effect of that, but also, sometimes even walking into a building, like to a Brotherhood event, hopefully one day soon, and going to a Brotherhood event and recognizing that they haven't actually physically been in the same space with other people for for 12 months, for 14 months, or whatever it is. And people that they used to talk to on a pretty regular basis, they may not have actually even talked to in the last year, right? So just the lack of there's only so many people you can be constantly in contact with at any given time, and so we're going to really have to we're going to have to really think through the reweaving. My sense is that the part of that reweaving is actually in the process of listening to one another and sharing stories and the power of our own narratives about how we survive this. And that's similar to pandemics past and similar to the ways in which Jewish communities have actually, gone through the ups and downs and the trials and tribulations of being Jewish in the world. It is actually through our stories and our narratives that are going to help us to reweave that social fabric and be supportive of one another and in love, in sharing our love and respect for one another. And so we really we're going to, I think, really take an effort to do a lot of listening to our congregants about where they are and how they're experiencing this, but also what their needs are and how we can help continue to work and support one another. I think that, in terms of sort of post, COVID realities, as the sort of question, what's the future state? I think that the future state is going to include a lot of COVID keepers, as Rabbi Nichols sort of said, that there's going to be a hybrid model of what it looks like to be both in person and also online, depending on the needs of the individual and of the family or the people participating. I think it's going to cause us to think really dramatically about the idea of space and about the need for, not just the building that we have, but also beyond the building, how we think creatively. A whole thing about the pandemic has forced us to be creative, to find new ways to connect. I think we're going to be doubling down in tribes, frankly. The tribes has been really in small group learning and in the creation of small groups. Tribes and small groups and various different ways that people have connected has been exceedingly important for people's well-being and for those communities to actually take care of one another. We have members of tribes who've been sick with COVID, and it's the members of tribe who've actually been stepping up and delivering food and on the doorsteps and then walking away. Like it has reshaped how the congregation cares for one another, supports one another, and shows up for one another. And so I think that those are things that we're going to definitely continue to keep. Jeff Schwartz asked the question, sort of, are we going to continue with the private ARC time? The answer is yes. People absolutely loved it, and we will. That's definitely going to be a COVID keeper. I think that in terms of the future model, I just think that what we're going to have to do is experiment and be creative and allow ourselves to recognize that this has been an opportunity for us to experiment and even break things that was sort of never would have considered to be broken, that we would never have broken before. Some of the things that we've done in the past just will not work in the new environment. And so we have to allow ourselves to be as creative as possible and to do some R&D and to experiment and to achieve, but also to fail, and to say, okay, that didn't work. Why didn't it work? And how do we go on? And I think that in many ways, one of the things that COVID has really brought us is a recognition that experimentation is really an okay thing. We've experimented with all sorts of things this year, some of which have been exceedingly successful, some of which haven't. Our MLK Shabbat, we had 820 screens, on it from people all over North Carolina. I mean, that is absolutely amazing. And it was really incredible. We've had sessions, incredible learning sessions throughout the year with hundreds of people. Our high holidays had more people in attendance. This is the secret of high holidays at Temple, is that we actually expect that not everyone's going to come. Right? If Kent, who's done all the ushering, if we had every single person in the temple actually come to high holidays, we would have serious problems in terms of space and seating, right? interestingly, we had thousands of people joining us for the high holidays from
yoga.
all over the place, and we had much higher overall attendance at the high holidays than we've ever had before. And that was, and we experiment with the high holidays. You saw the combination of both live and pre-recorded in order to create safety. That was all an experiment, which we're going to have to re-experiment. The Yom Kippur afternoons were packed. We had multiple Yom Kippur afternoons with hundreds of people joining us for Yom Kippur study. Our yoga experience previously had 20, 30 people in attendance for yoga. This year had 170 screens for yoga. That is really different than we've had before. And we have a commitment, as we look at the hybrid model, to continue to experiment and to recognize that as important as space is, that frankly, the ways that we connect, the ways that we build relationship, the ways that we do so and make a large community feel small, to have people connect together, that's going to be the primary way in which we live. And we have to start with a sincere listening of our community and help support one another and really listen to each other and create that and help us lift up and elevate the narratives that have helped us to survive through truly one of the most difficult times in Temple Beth's history and frankly probably all of our lives. I want to open it up to
Jason
questions.
has his hand raised.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Who does?
Jason Schechter.
Jason Schechter, please. Jason Schechter. There you go. There's your hand. I'm sorry, I didn't see the hand. You have a cartoon. Jason, your hand looks kind of like a cartoon. I just want to.
I didn't make it. I'm just going with what Zoom
Okay,
offers me. Obviously, we were talking about how there's plenty of suffering and a lot of people that are dealing with a lot right now, and I feel really awful about that, and I feel awful for them. My question is about a subset of people I'm having a harder time feeling bad about. So no fewer than 3 times last week, I received an email that stated that someone had come into our office, been tested the same day, and then had to call HR the next day and say, I've tested positive for COVID. Keep in mind that our office, it's completely optional to go in. You can work from home. I have been for, nearly a year almost at this point. And on the one occasion I did have to go into the office, I saw the people that were regularly going in, not wearing masks, congregating very close to one another, so on and so forth. I'm not happy that anyone gets sick. That's terrible, obviously. I guess I'm having a hard time with sitting on these team-wide calls where everyone goes around and says, oh my God, I feel so bad. Well, I feel bad too, but if you jump off a cliff and break your leg, most people understand what that was the
result of jumping off the cliff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm really struggling with people that refuse to wear masks, with people, someone came to my dad's work knowing he didn't feel good. And of course he tested positive, and thankfully my parents got tested and they're negative, but they're endangering other people's health. They're endangering their own health. I guess I'm suffering from some compassion fatigue because there are so many people suffering from being sick or from the economic fallout or whatever it is. And then you have some of the people I work with who I'm just shocked by that. So what would you say so that I can maybe think some slightly less ugly thoughts about that subset?
Again, I'm so happy that Rabbi Nichols is with us. So I'm just kidding. I'll take a first pass, and Rabbi Nichols can take it. So first off, I actually, one of the things that we've actually heard this, and I'm in my screen, I happen to see Howard Glazer and Michael Norman, two people who I adore in front of me, and I'm sure that there are other people in the medical professional. I will tell you that actually, where I've heard that most is actually the medical professionals in our community who are so frustrated right now with how people in the community have acted and or reacted. People who are on the front lines saving people's lives and recognizing that the decisions that people are making are causing the situation to actually get worse, and that no matter that, it's almost like with a lack of respect and lack of care that people have for the frontline workers and for others, that people are make those decisions. So I want to recognize there's lots of different people who've been also suffering, really angry. And in the conversations that I've been having with members of our community, the angriest has actually been the frontline workers that I have spoken with. I think that I came to a realization sort of early on that has helped me to gain some perspective, and at least be somewhat compassionate towards it. And the perspective is that that there are many, I think a lot of people who are trying their hardest to hold on to whatever normalcy they had before, right? Trying their hardest to create sort of a sense of normalcy for themselves or for their kids or whatever it is. And in doing that, have sort of sometimes shunned, practices that would actually make it safer for them. I think there's some groups, by the way, who I think are just like, I'm not going to wear a mask, don't infringe on my rights, right? All of that stuff. I think that that's not everyone, right? I think there are a lot of people who are trying to just desperately hold on to some type of normalcy. And I think that is in that holding on, that some of the decisions they make are, that's part of it, right? So I'm not talking about the people who are just sort of like, I refuse. I'm talking about people who sort of make decisions in the best in what they think are just trying to hold on to the normal. I think there's also people who sort of who are actually, because of sort of the lack of coordinated approach and response that we've had in our country, frankly, who also believe that they themselves are making great choices, right, and are making really, really great choices, and actually don't think that they're actually causing, that it can't possibly be them who are making the bad choices, if that makes sense. And I think that I've also tried to have some compassion around that, because I've been there myself. I mean, I have been as careful as possible. I went to go see someone who was diagnosed with brain cancer. This is a fact. I went to go see someone to have a face-to-face conversation with someone who is diagnosed with brain cancer. I wore a mask. They didn't, right? I didn't ask that person to put on a mask, right? The next day, that person ended up with a fever, and it turned out that they had COVID, right? And I'm thinking, like, I feel like I'm like living every Jewish value I can possibly have. I've been as careful as possible, even, as careful as possible. I'm trying to do my best and be the best friend and rabbi, you know what I'm saying? And you still just like, and all of a sudden I found myself telling staff that I had a COVID, reality. I had to go get COVID tests, and my kids are staying home from school, and, and all that stuff. So I just think that there are some people who are also like really feeling like they're making the right choices, and it still get caught. But I will say that it has it has been exceedingly frustrating. And I think the compassion fatigue for those who flaunt the rules. Absolutely. I have an next door neighbor whose kid is at a school in town, high school kid, who had a party. They had 40 kids, 50 kids in their backyard, right? Less than a month ago, right? And it's exceedingly it's exceedingly frustrating to see that kind of action and reaction on one hand. On the other hand, I know for a fact, having talked to our teenagers and the parents of our teenagers, how much their kids are suffering. And I know that at some point a parent said, let's just get the kids together. Like, can't they have some outlet? And they can be outside in our backyard, and we're just, some outlet. But, one school in town over winter break has, had a party with 70 kids, and that 28 of those kids ended up in, with COVID. So it is just really hard. And I do think that there's compassion fatigue. And I also think that people just don't necessarily recognize when people talk about bubbles, for example, I don't think that people really understand what bubbles really mean. I hate to say that, right? But if I'm sending my kid to a preschool, right, and in a preschool class, every single person that the parents of that other preschool kids are in touch with are also now included in my bubble, right? And the bubble of the class becomes infinitely large, and that's really hard. So I'm trying to have as much compassion as possible. Larry, I see your hand waving, and Shelly, go unmute yourself and please ask your question.
It's more of a comment than a question, but we had similar circumstance at a higher level. Our daughter is sending our grandson to the Jewish preschool in Washington, D.C., where Ivanka and Jared's children were. And they were asked to leave because they weren't taking appropriate steps.
A group of parents got together and said, this is not right. We're paying a lot of money for our children to come here, and their children are not masked, and they're coming from the White House where they just had a party or a gathering in the Rose Garden, and they're not masking. So a lot of people wrote letters, and the next day they were gone.
Yeah.
You do have to speak up.
We saw that. And the schools here have been really clear too. I mean, the schools here have been really, for those who've been in person, but let's be also really honest, there is a huge divide right now between private and public schools. We have thousands of kids in Charlotte, Mecklenburg, who have not shown up all year long. We have parents who are really struggling with their kids being online. Now, also, there's also kids who are thriving online and are like, I don't want to go back to school. To be totally honest, we're going to have kids who do not want to go back in person because they're actually doing so well in the online learning. Yeah.
In order to save a child, I was a school teacher. If it means that the child is home for a year and should have to repeat this year when they go back, if they're safe, there's no shame in that either. Some children can adapt and do very well. Other children are used to having the teacher right next to them answering every question, and they're not getting that. Even the parents say they're frustrated because they don't know how to teach the new math. They don't know a lot of things that are being taught. What should they do?
Yep. No, I think it is. And just to acknowledge also that if you have a parent whose work cannot be online and has to be in person, the effect that this is having on you vis-a-vis raising educating your kids is also exceedingly difficult. And we have a lot of older kids who are being responsible for younger kids and internet access issues, right? There's lots of challenges. Rich, I see your hand up. You want to ask your question?
My son has the same problem, though, in his office that you were talking about. People coming in and refusing to put a mask on.
Yeah.
What is the big deal?
I don't know what the big deal is, but what I would say is that management, our perspective has been that in order to come into Temple, you have to, follow the criteria, answer the questions, be masked, and be ready to do that. And institutions that aren't taking that responsibility to force employees to do that, I think have on their hands the health and well-being of people who are there. I want to let Rich answer a question. Then Howard, did you have a question as well?
All right, well, I'll ask mine. Based on the community needs, both the overall community, the Jewish community here in Charlotte, and the needs that the Temple season can take care of, what can we as individuals or we as the Brotherhood do to help?
I mean, one is, I think that just recognize that is your continued support. Honestly, we've had members of the Temple who've said to us, and of the broader Jewish community, I mean, the JCC lost an insane number of members, right? And the assumption is that the JCC is the JCC, and we've lost members at Temple Beth too, who've just flatly said to us, when your building's open, then we'll come, right? And the challenge of right now is we're trying to be a synagogue and do all the things that we need to do as a synagogue, regardless of whether or not we actually have a physical building. And two is that if you want a building with which to come back to, or a Jewish community to come back to, you have to stay committed and connected. And, that the same, the same, the J, part of the J's challenge, for example, and I don't want to speak for the J's, that so many members of the J are actually not Jewish. And for them, the membership of the J, for example, has been a gym. And when the gym, they bought people bought Pelotons, or they bought, or have been found other ways to exercise, or doing various different things. And they cut out their membership. But for the Jewish community, it is vital right now for the Jewish community to be able to be members and pay and supportive of the J. It's vital to be members and to be, supportive of the Jewish, communal institutions, so that they can, weather the storm. And I don't disparage families who made those choices. I can understand it. We had lots of religious school families who said, like, I can't manage more online learning this year. I just cannot do it. And they said, we're taking a pause. But that has huge financial ramifications. And so the health and well-being of the very institutions that the community, supports is actually, vitally connected with ongoing support. That's number one. Number two is, I think, continuing to connect into, things like JFS. We have lots of members of the Jewish community who, like we saw post, the recession, have been deeply and profoundly financially impacted by COVID. And some of it may be, helping, to support institutions like JFS and for food distribution, or bringing food in to be able to be part of the of giving food and helping to support those who are in need. I could imagine a day in which, people who've been small business owners who've been unbelievably hit during this time, where we create some type of investment fund to help support people to restart businesses, or to start new businesses, or new ideas, or to do something that is, creative and supportive of Jewish business owners at this time. I think that there's or create some type of Brotherhood accelerator, if you will, which could be fun and exciting. Like I think that there's ways that we as a community are going to have to think creatively about how to support members of the community who have been so adversely affected at this time, and to do so in a way that also gives people dignity. Right? People who've been out of a job, people who've been who've lost employment, or who've lost their businesses and whatnot. It's not because they don't want to work. It's because the dynamics of the economy has been just so brutal. And so recognizing that there shouldn't be shame around that, there shouldn't be shame about asking and requesting help, and that there's ways that we can continue to help people to rebuild and to be supportive of members in our community who are facing really tough times. Other questions? None. We answered all that we answered. Howard, did you have a question? It looked like you were unmuting yourself to maybe ask a question. I don't want to pick on you, but it looked like you had unmuted yourself.
Yeah, Rabbi John, I think just to help end on more of a positive note, and this is just so hard in so many ways. To paraphrase Paul Revere, the vaccines are here. They're coming. Get them if you have a chance. I think that's going to be our last great hope, and I think as a result of that, we will turn the corner on this, and we will get back to a normal that everybody likes. Just one word in my own family experience. As you may remember, my mom passed away last February. My first cousin, same week. The entire family from all over the country were there mourning. We didn't know what to do with each other. So sad. In retrospect, it was the most beautiful thing we could have ever experienced, being together as a family. In that situation, knowing now how many families around the country, around the world, have not been able to experience. I remember standing with a rabbi in the temple in a circle with our family, just supporting each other physically and emotionally. And those days will come again, but to have experienced that, thinking that this is a very difficult experience, it ended up being beautiful and one that we'll always treasure based on the pandemic coming on the heels of that. So anyway, just
yeah, I mean, I think Howard, to your point, I haven't told a lot of people this, but I haven't really been super public about it, but I participated in the Moderna vaccine trial. And I got to this place, Rich, where I was sort of asking the same kind of question, like, gosh darn it, what can I do? And so I determined that, one of the things I could do was actually, put my body at sort of some type of risk and say, like, I can participate in the academic study of the vaccine and making sure that we, do something. So I participated in the vaccine trial, and in late August and early September. And the result was, I found out very recently that I had received the placebo, which is so funny because honestly, if you ask Anna, the first night after I got the shot, I was like, I don't know, I'm not feeling good. I went to bed at like at 5:30, and I was like, I think I totally got it. I'm having some react. Well, totally. It was completely psychosomatic, and I had nothing. I had probably, so don't, we sort of laughed about that when I found out that I actually had the placebo. But I have now received the first, I've received the first shot of the actual of the Moderna vaccine. And I was talking to Israeli friends actually yesterday morning. I was on a Zoom with two Israeli colleagues and friends, and sort of talking about what's happening in Israel. And you can actually see what's happening in Israel pretty clearly. On one hand, from a worldwide perspective, we're looking at Israel. Israel has already vaccinated like 70% of the population. They're doing an unbelievable job getting the vaccine, and it has dropped the severity of cases and actually opened up room in the hospitals. So part of it is like, if you want to actually help the hospitals, get the vaccine. You want to protect your friends, get the vaccine. Protect yourself, get the vaccine, and go and do that. On the other hand, it was so fascinating with the Israeli colleagues is that they were saying that actually inside of Israel there has been real a sense of feeling like the Netanyahu government had not dealt with this appropriately. And part of the reason why what they were saying was just because, and this goes to the sort of Jewish value of pikuach nefesh and saving a life, was just really feeling like that the lack of the kowtowing to individuals within Israel who didn't want mask mandates and other types of preventative measures that could have happened, particularly in the ultra-right religious communities, has actually put more people at danger and caused ultimately more deaths in the state of Israel. And that 25% of the deaths that happened in the state of Israel have all happened in the last 2 months. And so it's just interesting that so Israelis are looking at this. We're looking at Israel saying, we wish we could be in Israel at the moment. And a lot of Israelis are looking at America thinking, well, it's a mess over there. And they're looking at themselves saying, and we still don't feel like we so value human life that we are angry about the lack of preventative measures that could have been taken and kowtowing to the religious right by the Netanyahu government. And so it's a fascinating dynamic that's also happening. Here's one thing that I would just say, and to sort of end on a positive note. I want to thank you for your participation this evening, and recognize that this is all part of a grand experiment. None of us have ever done this, and we're learning as we go. And the commitment that we have to have is to the constant process of learning, evolving, trying things new, researching, and then recognizing that we can take action together. And so whether it is just know that the phone lines are open, our emails are open, and that if you need anything, we're absolutely here for you as a community, as a clergy, and as a staff. And I would say, and I really firmly believe this, you should all be really proud of Temple Bethel's staff team. The staff have done an absolutely incredible job, and they've done an incredible job, just as everyone has been dealing with the pandemic themselves and with their own families and all of that. And I absolutely cannot emphasize enough how incredible our team is, and and truly, frankly, the level of caring, camaraderie, respect, and just gung-ho, we're going to solve this problem attitude every step of the way. So to Natalie, who's here, and to Rabbi Nichols, but to all of our staff members, I really do offer my deepest appreciation, because we have an incredible team that is serving our community and our Temple Beth staff, and across the park in Shalom Park and Federation and JC, the Levine Jewish Community Center. The staffs of the Jewish community have really stepped up in incredible ways. CJP, the day school, all of that. If you have any questions, I'm happy to hang around for a little while, but also want to recognize the time. Rabbi Nichols, do you want to add anything?
I want to just also thank Andy, who's on our call too.
Oh, sorry, Andy. Yes, absolutely.
And also wish everyone a happy Tu B'Shvat. Tomorrow evening is the beginning of Tu B'Shvat, hence my trees in the background here. You may not be able to, we may not be able to gather for Tu B'Shvat, but spend some time tomorrow outside appreciating the nature that we have here. So happy Tu
Brian
B'Shvat.
Emery, I know that you want to close and say some things.
Yes, Rabbi. First of all, I want to thank you and Rabbi Nichols for sharing with us all that you're dealing with during this pandemic and what's going on at the temple. I want to share with you, I have substantial personal feedback from many congregants that they are so appreciative of your efforts in keeping us connected virtually. I'd also like to mention that it seems from what Rabbi Nichols showed that if the CDC had read the Torah first, they may have saved themselves a lot of time and effort. Also, it appeared that maybe Rabbi Iger was the precursor of Dr. Fauci. But so I want to thank everyone for your attendance this evening, and also remind you the next Brotherhood event is February 23rd, where we have award-winning sports writer Scott Fowler, and we'll be sending out announcements that you can sign up for that event later on. So again, thanks to everyone, especially Rabbi Knight and Nichols.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
It was great. Thank you.
Night, everybody. Thank you, rabbis.
Thank you, rabbis.
Thank you.